I will walk away from a 7-figure deal. And they found a way to hire some psychiatrist who was able to fulfill that role for a sum. And I got the deal that I wanted.
She just sold her company. She sat in a room full of men negotiating the biggest deal of her lifetime. Wait, she sold for how much? I can't even believe she managed to get double her valuation. Let's keep this just between us.
Hey guys, it's Carrie Kerpen and welcome back to another episode of the Exit Whisperer. I hope you guys are in your feels today. Are you in your feels? Because we are talking to Joyce Marter, who is an amazing psychotherapist who founded Urban Balance, which grew to over 100 clinicians. Now, here's the thing. When she first made the decision to build, she built with a partner. That partner left really abruptly, leaving her in a complete cash flow crunch with nobody to help her and no plan. And you are going to hear how she facilitated that crisis and took that struggle and turned it into an incredible exit that gave her not one, not two, but 3 opportunities to extract value from the business. So I can't wait for you to listen to her. Also, she gets really into a lot of the feelings about money. And as you may or may not know, this is something that I've struggled with for most of my adult life, is a completely flawed relationship with money. And so you'll hear the conversation there, and it's really going to be a good one. Take a listen. Joyce, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Carrie. I'm excited.
I'm so excited to have you here today, especially because the business that you built is really one that is near and dear to my heart, which is really focusing on like destigmatizing mental illness as a whole, and just really, really being able to talk about some of this stuff, which has been so challenging for so long. And so I'm so grateful for you for coming on today.
Well, thank you for recognizing the importance of mental health. I'm super passionate about removing the shame and stigma and promoting access to care. And my business was an insurance-friendly counseling practice.
Okay, so tell me about that. Tell me about how it got started.
Well, I noticed in Chicago, where I was living at the time, that many therapists only accepted full fee self-pay, or they worked with Blue Cross Blue Shield because they were the easiest to work with. But many of us have other insurers like United Healthcare, Aetna, Cigna, et cetera.
Yeah.
And I believe we all should have therapy as a routine part of healthcare, and it should be accessible and affordable. So I saw the need for an in-network, insurance-friendly counseling practice.
Wow. So I know from personal experience, having navigated this for many years for many members of my family, that finding somebody who takes your insurance is so, so difficult. So how did you start out to build something that was insurance friendly? How did it happen?
I first was a sole proprietor, and I joined insurance networks and joined their panels. And then I had an abundance of referrals, and I was sending them to friends and colleagues. And I had an office mate and friend who said, Joyce, you should really do something with this and let me help you. And so we started Urban Balance together. We were both seeing 25 clients a week at the time. And so we were thinking we would pass off referrals to therapists who would use our offices during the evenings and the weekends.
Yep.
And then have some passive income.
So how did this grow? So you decide, okay, I'm going to take on a partner. We're going to build this. You end up growing to over 100 clinicians over time. So if you start by letting people use your office, then how does it become a full thing? Like, how does that evolve, and how does that impact? I would imagine, I don't know. I think like when you're a solo practitioner, you go out, you serve it, you help a client, you get paid, and it's one-to-one, very easy, the mechanics of it. But going from being a one-to-one clinical provider to a business owner at a larger scale is probably very overwhelming and crazy. So talk to me about that process.
Well, my former business partner and I had different strengths. So I was in charge of business development, marketing, PR, and finance. And she handled operations and a lot of the hiring procedures, getting people onboarded, developing systems in place for training them and the day to day operations. And initially, she and I were doing everything ourselves. So she was handling intake, I was handling billing. I was a young mom, so a mompreneur, and she was a single woman wanting to travel more.
Yep.
And so we hired that one therapist at a time. And because of the demand in the marketplace for insurance friendly therapy, we grew before we had the infrastructure in place. And we started the business with $500 each to
Yeah.
invest. We
Yeah.
both had enormous student loans.
Yep.
And unfortunately, even though we grew tremendously so quickly, we ended up in cash flow hell because
Yeah.
the bigger we got, the more money was outstanding in insurance claims. And it was okay when it was $10,000, and it was not okay when it was hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Okay. So let me see if I get this straight. You grow. You're going to bring on therapists. You're going to bring on people. You are in charge of new business and marketing, and you're driving business at this point. Like we're growing. Money takes forever to come in, because there's an insurance reimbursement process, I would imagine too, and it creates an overall cash flow, especially as you scale. People think when you get bigger, like, oh, there's so much money, when in reality, sometimes when you get bigger, there's almost no money. And so it sounds like that's where you were.
Exactly. So as we grew, we were no longer able to handle those responsibilities that we were doing ourselves. So we
Right.
hired a person to help with intake. We hired an internal accountant to handle payroll and accounts receivable. We handled a billing specialist, et cetera. And so we had more overhead, and then we added locations and services. So I always felt like it was like a staircase. Like
Yep.
we would take on an initiative of growth by hiring someone or adding a new location. And then we needed to stabilize and have the money come in and kind of catch up. And then we would grow again. But at some point, the wheels came off, and I actually lost my business partner. She was like, this is way too stressful. I can't handle this. And she resigned suddenly
Oh,
over email, and she was one of my best friends.
she was just like, I'm out. I'm out.
She said, I'm out. And she copied our whole staff. So the staff was like, oh my gosh, one of the owners is leaving. The business must be sinking.
Wait, she copied the staff before she spoke to you. It was just like they found out when you found out?
Yes. Yes. And she actually never came back. Never came back to the office. I had to send her stuff. And
Did she surrender
thankfully,
like her shares or whatever shares she had? I guess she just, okay.
yeah, her artwork and stuff and her diplomas. Yeah. So thankfully, and this is some advice that I have for all business owners, we had a pre-dissolution agreement, like a prenuptial agreement, partnership resolution agreement. And so we had when we first formed the business, an agreement of how we would handle it if in the event that we ever split, which I would have bet my life on it. I thought we were going to be friends when we were little old ladies. I did not think in my wildest dreams that we would ever need that. And it was devastating. I would have filed bankruptcy 100 times over for the friendship. So I was deeply hurt, and half our staff left, taking their clients with them. And this
Oh my
taught me,
God.
it was horrible, honestly. I was already in cash flow hell, and I really thought I was going to have to file bankruptcy and close the business.
Oh my God.
And
So
this,
the staff leaves. I guess that staff was like connected to her then in some way. Is that why they left? Or it
some
was just
more,
cash
some
flow?
won't. She retained an office in Wisconsin where she lived.
Okay.
And so it was more people who were like, oh my gosh, this is a sinking
This is
ship.
a sinking ship because they knew probably the cash flow. It's very stressful. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so that was devastating, but it taught me a really important life lesson, and that's the lesson of humility and asking for help. So instead of pretending like, "Hey guys, everything's fine," and I'm laying awake at night with insomnia and panic attacks, I started telling everyone like, "Oh my goodness, I made some significant errors. I did not seek proper business and financial consultation, and we are in a cash flow pickle, and I desperately need help. And help came out of the woodwork. My own team was so happy to help. And I had made the leadership mistake of thinking that I was taking care of them by sort of not sharing all the
By
business problems.
protecting them, but instead, when you were honest and vulnerable, they stepped up.
They totally stepped up and they were happy. They loved the company and loved the mission
Yeah.
that we had. And
Yeah.
even a neighbor said to me, he was like, Joyce, it sounds like you need a business valuation. And I said, what's that? I'm a therapist. I'm not business trained. And he
Yeah.
said, talk to my CPA. I think he can help you.
Yeah. Okay.
And
So you go to get okay. So you already had the disillusionment document. So that's a clean break because we already know. Great. So she's out.
yeah, I assumed responsibility for 5 long-term leases. We're talking millions of dollars of
Yep.
leases
Yep.
and hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, simply because I believed in the company, I believed in my employees and the clients, and I wasn't going to abandon ship. And I knew it had value.
Wow. So you took on all of this liability and you say, okay, I'm going for it and I'm going to get the business valued right now. So talk to me about that process.
I remember crying as I handed my QuickBooks file over to the CPA, who was
Totally.
incredibly kind. And
Totally.
I could see he felt so, so bad for me. And he said, I'll call you in a couple days and let you know what I
Yeah.
think. And
Yeah.
he called me, and I remember I was in my car and he said, Joyce, are you sitting down? And I said, yeah. And he said, your business is worth a 7-figure multiple.
Yeah.
He said, you truly have a cash flow problem and I can help you. And I didn't understand the math behind that because I was like, what are you talking about? I don't have a dime and we're hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt.
Yeah.
Well, he helped me get the proper lending and he looked at our business model, noticed some things that weren't to scale. For example, we had office managers at each location and we were losing our shirts on that. So we had to do some restructuring. And I knew at that point I was pretty burnt out. I was so deeply hurt by this business partnership breakup. And I said to myself, I have 5 years left in me to give it my all and work with my leadership team to turn this ship around and prepare it for exit.
So I would imagine after what is most certainly a betrayal, right? The leaving, betrayal and the weight of the cash flow situation, the CPA gives you hope. You now have to summon up whatever energy you have to get this to the 7-figure exit that you know that you can have. Where do you summon that strength from? How does that process and that rebuilding happen?
Well, thankfully, I had recently gotten into meditation and yoga, and yoga is meditation with
Yep.
movement.
Yep.
And it helped me connect with my deeper, higher self and detach from my ego. And it helped me build the resilience to power through. I was able to use mindfulness strategies like healthy detachment to kind of separate from my financial problems so that I could do the work. And it was an act of humility and courage, frankly. I had to every day face the bills that I couldn't pay, face my staff who had a million questions. And I love the quote from Eleanor Roosevelt. She says, a woman is like a tea bag. She doesn't realize how strong she is until she's put in hot water.
Mm-hmm.
And that experience taught me that I could fly solo, that I was a lot stronger than I ever imagined. And I was able to make decisions in my business more efficiently because I was the only owner at that point. And so it was really difficult. I'm not going to lie. It was the next year or year and a half were really challenging, but then it started to roll. I started to use tools actually from my psychological training to help me cope with the financial trauma and the financial stress, and to change my money mindset using cognitive behavioral therapy, narrative therapy, and more.
We are getting into this. I can't wait. That's the back half. I cannot wait for you to tell my listeners about this, but that's amazing. So you switched your mindset to sort of relieve that anxiety that could be paralyzing about the finance stress.
Yes. So as a therapist, I believe we all unconsciously recreate what's familiar. And my dad was born during the Great Depression,
Yeah.
although he pulled himself up by his bootstraps and he became a Harvard educated executive.
Yeah.
And yet he had horrible scarcity mindset
Yeah.
around money
Yeah.
and became unemployed when I was a child and
Yeah.
dealt with clinical depression.
Mm-hmm.
So I had that same scarcity mindset. It kind of drove workaholism. And I created this business where it looked amazing. Like I was on MTV, I was on the news, I was, on the covers of magazines and had all these employees, but I had not a dollar to my name. And so I felt some, imposter syndrome, a lot of anxiety. And so once I sort of was more vulnerable and open with people and really worked on that scarcity mindset and cultivating abundance, then I was like, I am a multi-million dollar practice owner and I'm going to sell this for an amazing amount to people who are going to help it grow and reach even more people and help even more people. And I'm going to free myself to be the speaker author that I want to be, to share what I've learned.
So how do you get there? So give me some of the actual steps beyond just your own mindset. What did you do to fix the cash flow? So they found a couple of things, the office managers. What else did you do to ensure that you got the valuation that you wanted?
Well, I had a really cool opportunity with Kellogg, the School of Business at Northwestern, where a professor reached out and asked if I would host 3 students. And they worked for a quarter and they completely did a deep assessment of my entire business and an analysis for
Oh my
free.
God. So
Everything from marketing to our systems and processes. And they discovered some interesting things. They discovered, for example, that we were only using our office space 45% of the time. Not good.
no.
And so we ended up, silly thing. I was like, well, what if we opened on Sundays? And suddenly we have Sundays open, and we learned that kids and adolescents,
Right.
college students,
Right.
couples like to come on Sundays. And so that added to our revenue. That was an amazing insight that really helped.
Wow. Okay, so you make all these changes and now it's like over the course of 5 years before you actually sell, right? So you're working on this, you're building. How does the sale come to be? Tell me about that process.
So it about 3.5 years in to my 5 years of bandwidth,
Yeah.
I started interviewing people about how to sell a business.
Okay.
And I started talking to my CPA, who said I should definitely talk with his M&A person, his
Yeah.
broker,
Yep.
Mike Adhikari.
Okay.
And so I had some meetings with them. And then I had some preliminary conversations with people who I thought would be possible prospective buyers within my own network. And as I got more clear on what the process might be like, and Mike educated me about it, then I really worked on kind of like a vision board, really getting crystal clear on what I wanted. And
Yeah.
so to me, I mean, obviously price is part of it, but I also am a mission driven person. So that alignment with the buyer was really important so that they could carry on the vision of the company that I had. Also my role, I absolutely did not want to stay on
Yep.
as president, or
Because you knew, especially you had the 5-year plan. You were like, I'm going to be done then.
I
Yes.
wanted to be free and clear
Yep.
and, really cash out on my nest egg
Yep.
and relieve myself of the responsibility of all these leases and employees and clinical liability. So I wrote all of that down. I was very clear about that with my broker. He put the business up on the market,
Yep.
obviously blind in the way
Yep.
that
You did like a blind auction. You put it up and they don't say who you are, but they describe the type of business. They put it up and then you get hopefully some offers. So how did that go for you?
we had 50 prospective buyers, which was really exciting. And that led to 8 offers over the course of, I would say, a year. This maybe took close to a year, 6 months, 9 months. Some of the prospective buyers I knew right away weren't a fit. They had no knowledge of the behavioral health industry. They had grown other service businesses like dentist practices and that type of thing. But I didn't feel that alignment. Some were real lowball
Yeah.
kind of offer situations. And some were, for example, one prospective buyer, they offered me sort of the sexiest deal. It had the biggest price tag, cash up front, a lot of it, but they wanted me to stay on. And more importantly, I was practicing mindfulness when meeting with them, and I viscerally felt distrust. And I viscerally felt some layers of misogyny in
Yeah.
some of the statements they were making to me. And so I declined that offer, and I'm so glad that I did. And I chose the buyer that most aligned with my criteria. And I'm so thankful that I chose that buyer also because they let me get out of my role.
Yep.
They did give me a consultancy role at the parent company, which was cool because it was very part-time and well paid and a nice transition. And most importantly, they allowed me to roll over stock into the parent company.
Oh, that's
And
great.
so I ended up getting 3 bites of the apple. I sold the company for a 7-figure amount.
Yep.
And then the parent company sold for another 7-figure amount. And I actually earned double on that. And then it sold again. And
So
so, yeah, I'm so grateful.
Oh, that is so awesome. And so so it wasn't the best offer on paper from a cash perspective, but it ended up being more cash than you could have anticipated.
Yes. And
Oh,
I just knew that. I sold my business in my 40s and I was like,
yep.
I'm not ready to throw out the towel. I'm an
Right.
entrepreneur. I want some
Right.
skin in the game.
Right.
And I knew the mental health industry was growing. And so my accountant and my financial advisor later shared, they were like, we thought you were nuts. We were like, you've been traumatized by this business. Like, why don't you just get out? But I was really glad that I stuck with my gut. Another piece of advice that I would definitely share is that I knew I didn't want clinical liability. And I had a great, sort of buyer experience with Refresh. Our due diligence process went very well. The price remained the same from the letter of intent until the close.
Good.
I ended up getting the full note that was contingent on
Yeah.
20% growth. I got my full escrow back. Everything went great. But right before the close, like we're talking 10 days before the close, they were like, oh, small detail. We just need you to stay on as clinical director, but only on paper. And I said, no.
No.
And they were like, what? You're going to walk away from a 7-figure deal? And I said, yes, I will walk away from a 7-figure deal. And I'm absolutely not doing that. And they found a way to hire some psychiatrist who was able to fulfill that role for a sum. And I got the deal that I wanted. So
This is
it's
such an
done.
important detail, Joyce, because so many people at the 11th hour feel like they should fold because it's so close. They just want to get it across the finish line. But if something is really important to you, don't fold, and they will find a way to work around it, or it's not the right deal. And I think that's so, so, so important. So thank you for sharing that. And I know you are the author of The Financial Mindset Fix, a mental fitness program for an abundant life. And also, I know Sounds True, you're an affiliate author with, right? That's
Yes.
really wonderful. Tell us a little bit about how one achieves a financial mindset fix. You talked about it a little bit for yourself earlier, but what are some of the steps that people can do? I told you a little bit before the show, but I definitely have financial mindset challenges even after having achieved a lot of success. It's funny when you talk about history. I always think that for me, because I didn't grow up. I grew up in a very middle class house, and we never even talked about money. My parents worked for the government, and had pensions. There was no risk taking. There was no any of that. But I do think there's something for me from my history of the fact that I am a second generation Holocaust survivor child, right?
Goodness.
And there's been
Yes.
lot of trauma of like, you need like hyper independence so you can pick up and run. If you have to pick up and run anywhere, like you need, and it's like, and sticking together, like with a
Yes.
real tightness and closeness. So I think that there is something with that for me. But when you're looking at these types of issues that clearly stem from your history or from anything else, how do you, what small things can you do to achieve a financial mindset fix?
Oh my gosh, Carrie, thank you for sharing your
Of course.
story. And that's an example of intergenerational financial
Yeah.
trauma.
Yeah.
And so we want to ask ourselves about our ancestors because what our ancestors lived through lives in our DNA, in our
Yeah.
epigenetics. So we are
Yeah.
genetically predispositioned to respond to money stress as our ancestors did. And so there is a biological, neurological component to that that we have to honor. We have to honor our own families of origin and how we grew up and money messages like
Mhm.
your family not talking about it. My
Mhm.
family was arguing about it.
Mm.
And, so what was that like for you? And what are your emotions around money?
Mm.
So I remember feeling shame because we lived in this nice big house and people would ask for charitable donations and my dad would hang up on them because he was unemployed and depressed and I
Mm.
was confused.
Mm.
And so we want to honor with self-compassion how our own money stories shaped us and then become conscious of those beliefs and what our beliefs are about our relationship with money. And some of those might be gender messages, birth order messages, cultural or religious messages. And we want to reevaluate those. We also want to pay attention to our thoughts around money. Cognitive behavioral therapy asserts that our thoughts precede our emotions and behaviors. So if we have thoughts like, I'm broke, I'm going to end up homeless, through self fulfilling prophecy, we end up creating that through the anxiety that we're fueling. And so we have to stop and reroute our neural pathways by using CBT to restructure our thoughts to abundant thinking. And then if we apply mindfulness to money, we know money is about flow and that we can plug into flow. And it's just like breath or love. It ebbs, it flows. We have to trust in the process. We have to detach from the anxiety of risk, which is a necessary part of growth.
Mm-hmm.
And, this is not an easy practice, but what I teach are these tools and how to apply them to cope with money stress, but also to welcome the prosperity that we are each deserving of receiving.
Fantastic. And you teach a course through Sounds True. Yes. Where are the best way? Because I know for a fact, I know what my listeners care about. And a lot of times, like we want to hear the exit stories, but we want to hear, we want to see ourselves in these guests. And I know there are so many people who can really see themselves not only in this story, but in some of the shit that they need to tackle,
Yes.
And so where's the best way? Is it to go through Sounds True for this course? Are you teaching? What are you doing? Obviously, everybody needs to buy the Financial Mindset Fix, a mental fitness program for an abundant life. But aside from that, how else can they learn from you?
Yeah, the book is available on Amazon. It's
Okay.
available on Audible, Kindle, and most book retailers. It's won 8 book awards and was mentioned
Amazing.
in six global festivals. My website is the best place to find me which is joycemarter.com, JoyceMarter.com. I'm a keynote speaker and corporate trainer. So I speak for banks, financial companies, women's groups, organizations across the world about financial mindset and mental health. And I also do some limited coaching. So follow me on LinkedIn, follow me on Instagram and other social media, and direct message me if I can be a support or resource to you.
You heard her, ladies. Let's go. Get on over there because Joyce is no joke. This was such an amazing interview. Joyce, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Carrie, for the work that you do and for having me.
Thank you.